1920s through the 1940s, the same thing happened in South Africa. They stopped allowing African Americans to come to South Africa because of Garveyism, AME, and et cetera, et cetera. Do you see a break in that slumber being now or in the 80s with the African American anti-apartheid law?
Oh, I see. Well, I'm glad you brought up the Free South Africa movement and Trans-Africa and the divestment movement that swept through campuses. I would imagine this campus as well, during the 1980s when students demanded that university endowments not be invested in corporations that have holdings in South Africa. This was a very important movement. It's represented in the African Activist Archive Project. And I think in some ways, what you're saying is a corrective to what I was just saying. Because that movement shows that a certain kind of internationalism continued to bubble to the surface. Even after Du Bois passed away in 1963 and Robeson passed away in 1976. But after the liberation of South Africa, it seems as if that movement went into remission. Now, with regard to law school, I saw this documentary about Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, the other day, and he was saying that he analogizes writing computer code to going to law school. Because he says, just like going to law school, for any of you who've done it, it basically gives you a way of thinking, for example. Some might say, the critics would say, it sharpens the mind by narrowing the mind. That might be too harsh. But certainly it gives you a way of thinking. And so yes, I think law school can be very important in terms of how do you look at the world. I think law school is very important in terms of reasoning by analogy. In other words, well, I won't go into that. But, and I will say, what was the third question that you asked?
Concerning the banning of African Americans.
Oh, I see.
Based upon your analysis of Kenya.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting how Black Americans during those decades were bad. First of all, we had difficulty in getting U.S. passports, point number one, in order to travel abroad. Second of all, we had difficulty in getting visas to enter countries. I talk about that with regard to Kenya in particular, how difficult it was for Black Americans to get into Kenya. And it's very interesting. There were these folk beliefs. I think George Shepperson, the historian, talks about it. A historian talks about it, these folk beliefs, like in the country that is now Malawi, where they had this folk belief that in order to effectuate their liberation, they would be assisted by Black Americans flying airplanes. Oh, you heard of that?
It's in South Africa as well. Mm-hmm. I think Robert Vincent wrote a book.
Yeah, yeah. So there was good reason, in a sense, for these colonial authorities to try to keep us out of Africa. But today, I mean, colonialism, by and large, has left the African continent. Of course, we still have the problem of Western Sahara and other territories, but by and large, it's left the African continent. And as noted, we have supersonic transport that makes it easier to get to Africa and the Caribbean. Certainly, it's quicker than taking a ship. But paradoxically enough, the kinds of contacts that we once had, and the kinds of alliances that we once had, are not as prevalent today as they might have been some years ago.
Yes. Philip.
Thank you for a very fascinating talk, presentation. I'm glad that you were able to